Well, good evening. My name is Bill Purcell, Director of the Institute of Politics, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. Tonight, we have a very special forum with Valerie Jarrett, Senior Advisor to the President of the United States, Barack Obama. With Valerie Jarrett's personal achievement and family legacy, we consider it a special honor to have an opportunity to host her here during this month of reflection and celebration. Valerie Jarrett's great-grandfather was the first African-American to graduate from MIT. Her grandfather was the first black man to head the Chicago Housing Authority, and her father was the first black resident at St. Luke's Hospital in Chicago. And Valerie Jarrett has earned her own place in history as one of the leading forces behind the election of the first African-American president of the United States. To introduce our guest and to moderate our program here tonight is David Gergen. David Gergen is Professor of Public Service and Director of the Center for Public Leadership here at the Harvard Kennedy School, also one of tonight's important co-sponsors. He's a familiar face to the people in this room as a key figure in so many forums here and in so many classes here at the Kennedy School, and he's a familiar face to people around the country and the world as an analyst on CNN. A man who has served as an advisor to 4 United States presidents, President Nixon, President Ford, President Reagan, and President Clinton, one of the most well-known political advisors, observers, commentators, and analysts of our time. Is the author as well of the best-selling book, Eyewitness to Power, The Essence of Leadership, Nixon to Clinton. Please join me in welcoming Professor David Gergen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bill Purcell. A man who's become an outstanding director of the Institute of Politics here at this university. It is particularly fitting, as Bill suggested, that coming to this forum, one of the most widely respected and influential of all forums at all universities in this country, is one of the most respected and influential members of our government today. And I might add from personal experience, one of the classiest. It's an honor to be able to welcome Valerie Jarrett here to this campus. We're going to have a conversation at her request because we thought it would make it a little more informal. If we could have a conversation more interactive, and she and I will talk together for a few moments about her life, about Washington, and about service of the next generation, her thoughts about those of you who are considering paths to serve others. So we'll have a fair amount of ground to cover, and then we'll go to your questions, and we'll look forward to that. To pick up on some of the threads of Bill's opening, Valerie Jarrett has come not only from a distinguished lineage, but she herself has built I think what can only be called a distinguished and fulfilling life. She was born actually in Iran. Her dad was a doctor. He was running a hospital there in Iran. She spent her early years there, and so one of the harmonies you might find between Barack Obama and Valerie Jarrett may well come back to that kind of background. They then moved to London for a year, and her dad came back. He was a doctor and went back to the University of Chicago, where she spent her early years and her teen years, and then she went off to Stanford as an undergraduate, and from there went to the University of Michigan Law School. Came back to Chicago to practice law. All good law graduates do that, right? And like many good law graduates, it was not as satisfying as it might be. So for all of you going to law school, there is still time to apply to the Kennedy School.
Very good.
But Valerie spent a decade at 2 law firms, not very happy. A couple things happened in her life. And one of the single most important things that happened was she had a daughter. And her daughter, Laura, is now here at the law school in her 3rd year. And I think it would be wonderful if we could all greet her and say how much we appreciate.
Hi, sweetie.
Laura will be clerking this next year for a federal judge. And maybe it will be the beginning of her public service career as well. We'll wait and see. But it was around the birth of her daughter that Valerie Jarrett left to join the government of Harold Washington. He was then the mayor of Chicago. She worked for him, and as you may remember, he died early. tragically, and he was succeeded by Richard Daley, and she went on to work for Richard Daley and became, I think you were the vice chief of staff or the deputy chief of staff? Deputy chief of staff. And while she was working in city government, she interviewed a young woman named Michelle. And if we could, Valerie, because why don't you pick it up from there? Because so much has become so important. But let me just add one last point. Valerie Jarrett, today, you should understand, is a very trusted advisor for President Obama. She's a sounding board. She's someone who is, you know, when you're in meetings, sometimes one person is asked to stay behind and talk and have a private conversation about what just happened. She's the one who's asked to stay behind. She's often on Air Force One in long conversations with the president coming back from trips or coming back from town halls to talk about the state of the country. And she trusts her in all things. But the relationship goes beyond that. And I just want to recall to you a conversation I once had with David Herbert Donald. He was a historian here at this university and wrote one of the best one-volume biographies of Abraham Lincoln. And I had an opportunity once to interview him and asked him, what's the single most important asset that a president should have in order to govern effectively? And he looked at me and said, a friend. A friend. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the nation's first friend, Valerie Jarrett.
Well, thank you, David, for that very gracious introduction and beginning of my life story. And thank you all for coming here today. As I look up in the lights, I can see everybody up there. Hello, you guys up at the top. I really appreciate, hey, up there. I appreciate everyone coming out. Having grown up really right adjacent to the University of Chicago, there's nothing more vibrant and intellectually curious as coming back to a university setting. And so I find this replenishing, and so I thank you for providing me with this short respite away from my new home of Washington, D.C. And we'll talk a little bit about my new home in a second. But to pick up where David left off in my life story, yes, I did join the city government in Chicago, and it was a leap of faith when I left my law firm. And I think I was, and it isn't the same for everybody, and I know many of the folks who might be lawyers in the room have enjoyed the private practice of law, but for me it simply was not that fulfilling, and it took me a little while to figure it out. But once I finally figured it out, I decided I wanted to be a part of something really much bigger than myself, and having spent most of my life in Chicago, I wanted to do something where I could give back to the city that I had so much enjoyed. And so by the time I met Michelle then Robinson, I had been in city government for 4 years. And just to show you, and this is kind of one of those life lessons, how people stay in your life and they go and they come and they swirl around for a bit. The person who sent me Michelle's resume was a woman by the name of Susan Schur. And Susan was, at that point, the corporation counsel for the city of Chicago. And when I had been in the corporation council practicing law, our offices were next door to each other, and we became best of friends. And so when I moved to the mayor's office, we obviously continued the relationship just down the hall from one another. And she received Michelle's resume from Newt Minow. Martha Minow, of course, is the dean of the law school. And Newt sent it over with a note, and it said, "Terrific young woman. Unfortunately, she no longer wants to practice at a law firm. She'd be a huge asset to public service." And so Susan sent the resume down the hall to me. Just to fast forward for a second, Susan went on to become the general counsel of the University of Chicago Medical Center. Michelle joined her team, and now Susan is the First Lady's chief of staff. So it just goes to show you how related these relationships really are, and hopefully are lifelong relationships. So when I saw Michelle's resume, as you can imagine, it was just terrific on paper. And I called her up and I said, introduced myself, and I said, "Look, would you mind coming in and chatting with me? I left the practice of law too. I know that you're not interested in it. You're not feeling fulfilled. Come on down." And so what was supposed to be a half-an-hour interview turned into an hour and a half. And at the end of the hour and a half, I said, "Please accept this job offer and come and work for us," which was really totally inappropriate because technically, the mayor should have been the one to make her the offer, since she was, as you would know, Manny, since she was joining the mayor's staff. But I was so captivated by this extraordinary woman. Well, she had far more sense than I did, and she said, well, let me think about it for a minute. So I hadn't heard from her in a couple of days, so I called her up and I said, well, a minute has long passed. What do you think? And she said, I know this is going to sound strange, but would you mind having dinner with my fiance and me? Because we're just not sure, given that he started as a community organizer and spent the early part of his career fighting city government and trying to put pressure on city government to deliver the kind of resources that the communities needed. He's not sure, nor am I, that I should leap into the mayor's office. So how about it? So the three of us had dinner, and we like to say the rest is history. But what struck me about then Barack Obama, now President Obama, was a few characteristics. Number one, he was a very good listener, and he asked me all these very inquisitive questions that if somebody else had asked me, I probably wouldn't have answered. But he had a way of making me feel instantly at peace and calm, and opened up, and I talked to him about my experience growing up in Iran, and he talked to me about Indonesia and Hawaii. And I think part of our bond was, just as you said, David, the sense that we were part of a world out there as opposed to simply a part of a community, and that we appreciated a community because we'd experienced the world. And so I think that was where the bond began. And at the end of the dinner, I said, well, I know I was supposed to pass some test here. And did I pass the test? And so they said, we'll get back to you. They were, the more I'm thinking about it, they were very tough to be so young, because this is now 1991. And so anyway, they eventually caved in, and Michelle did come. And we spent many years together working in a variety of different capacities.
But it's been really interesting. You've become almost like a sibling.
Well, I'm an only child. My daughter's an only child. And I think that our relationship, as many relationships that withstand the test of time, evolve with time. And I think at first, because I am a few years older, not that many years older, but just a few years older than they are, it did start out more as a mentor, and I was Michelle's boss. And the president was just beginning his career. In fact, he hadn't even run for the state senate yet. And so I think, in a sense, we grew up together, and we had a chance to evolve from that mentor-mentee relationship to really just be good friends. And I chaired his finance committee when he ran for the U.S. Senate, and I was involved in his state Senate campaign, and obviously involved in his presidential campaign. And I think as you go along through life's journey, and those of you who are older in the audience will appreciate this, the bonds that you form when you are younger that do withstand the test of time become so much more precious. And the higher you go, the harder it is to really find friends that you can trust, people who kind of know you back in the day, if you will. And so I think because of that, we do have kind of a unique relationship right now.
And how did you see him change over those years before he came to Washington?
Well, you know, people ask me that all the time. Honestly, I have not seen him change remarkably. I think he's always had a very good, even-keeled temperament, and his highs are never very high, and his lows are never very low, and he's always very disciplined in his analysis and his thought process, coupled with a sense of empathy that I think comes from growing up with his mom, being a single mom, and having times in their life when they were very poor, and seeing his mother have to make some tough decisions, and having to leave him in Hawaii for years where she was in Indonesia. And so he's kind of had the best of both worlds. He's had these tough life experiences that left him with this deep sense of empathy, yet extraordinarily bright and talented. But I think part of why he made the choice of his path to begin as a community organizer was the same sense that I hope many of you feel, of the desire to give back and help people who really need help.
And for those people who may wind up being a counselor, in effect, and a friend to someone who is running a big organization, what do you find is most helpful from you for him?
Well, that's a tough question. You'd have to really ask him that question. But I think part of it is, and this, again, the higher I think you go, the harder it is to find people who will actually tell you the truth, particularly if they disagree with you. And we used to tease him during the course of the campaign as he started to do better and better. He said, you know, I'm becoming smarter and smarter. You know, suddenly the press thinks I'm terrific, and I was just a mope when I began the campaign, and everyone thought it was just a long shot. And I think that two things happen. One, as you rise, it's harder and harder for people to give you bad news, and the circle of people around you shrinks. And those two factors coming together make the friends that you do have that are in that tight circle more important. And my view is this, is that, and we think a lot alike philosophically. I think our values are the same, our outlook about our country and what we would like to do for our country is identical, but there are lots of different paths to get there. And one thing that you certainly find in government or in public services is that because there are so many paths, reasonable people could disagree. In Washington, unreasonable people disagree too. But when reasonable people are disagreeing, that's good. And one of the strengths of his management style that I really admire is his ability to bring together an extremely diverse in terms of thought group of people and make everyone feel very comfortable opening up. And it's like you've got a terrific professor, maybe his years of being a law professor come in handy, coupled with being a good listener. And so everyone has this willingness to open up, just as I did at that initial dinner with this free flow of ideas. It's a very effective management style.
Interesting. And from his perspective, and just watching presidents I've known and reading about others, they turn to sort of the close-in person, the friend who can tell them the truth for different purposes. Sometimes they like to think out loud. They just like to sort of ruminate on what they've seen and they know it will stay there, but it's a chance to give voice. Other times it's actually a chance to, I'm sort of groping or grappling with this problem, I'm not quite sure which way to go, what do you think? And sometimes, with Franklin Roosevelt, he sometimes liked to have people around just for fun. Just to have some sheer fun. He used to have a cocktail hour at the end of every day for an hour, and they'd just gossip, and he would mimic people and things like that. So I'm just sort of, where do you, I don't see you, I don't see Barack Obama in a cocktail hour situation, mimicking people. So where do you sort of, but how do you, what role do you play in this, in that sense?
Well, I think the expectation, hopefully, is that I can do all of the above. Now, I will say that I try very hard to, we both try very hard to compartmentalize. And so when I am his senior advisor, sitting in the room with the other senior advisors, I call him Mr. President. I try to be succinct and give him advice as he has asked for it. I feel very free to tell him when I completely disagree with him, respectfully, of course. And so in a group, I think it's a very constructive conversation, and I feel that I'm the same as all the other senior advisors. If we're hanging out and it's a weekend and we're about to go watch a movie, well, then it's a totally different relationship. And he's Barack, and
he's Barack then.
Of course, he's Barack. Yes, absolutely. Of course.
I work for Republicans. You got to understand they're a little more formal.
Oh, that may be, but having spent a little time recently with our former president, he's pretty informal too. President Bush is pretty informal. I mean that as a compliment, a very deep compliment. Well, give an aside, just to provide a little context, President Bush and President Clinton came to the White House recently to join President Obama in an effort to raise funds for the people in Haiti who are so desperately in need of support. And it was one of the most extraordinary events that we've had, because regardless of acrimony and politics and everything, to see these three men come together and unite behind a common cause is really, I think, the best of what our country is. And what frustrates me, to digress just a minute.
Well, actually, we're segueing.
Okay, segue, digress. Yeah, we are. What frustrates me is that in times of crisis, we really do all come together. And what it is about human nature that can't do that as the rule as opposed to the exception escapes me. So it was a great day. And that's where I saw the informal.
There's people who've been president or even worked in the White House, there's a fraternity of people like that who realize there's something larger going on here that transcends party and transcends the moment. There's really there's a chain that you're part of. And I think
part of what's good about our country is that we have the organized and disciplined continuation of power, and just the fact that you can have these heat debates and yet turn over power in an orderly way says a lot about our democracy.
Yeah. When you're coming here in this sort of these bright lights in this very warm environment, brings back a lot of memories of what it seemed like about more than a year ago when Barack Obama was elected, and the sense of hope and optimism, and particularly with the acceptance and then the inauguration. I mean, I don't think Washington's ever seen a day like that inauguration, where people seem to transcend the boundaries and barriers between us. And yet that feeling is sort of has slipped away. There are many who continue to be ardent and believers and believe that Barack Obama is going to go down in history, would be remembered as one of our great leaders. There are others who've been disappointed, and obviously there's some who've been quite vocal in their disagreement. But there is a changed sense, clearly, and remembering how much he was, how the evocations of Abraham Lincoln when he announced in Springfield and some of the speeches, I was struck by the new issue of The Economist, which has a picture of Abraham Lincoln in his chair at the monument with his head in his hands, and said, and the question from Lincoln is, what's gone wrong in Washington? What's gone wrong in Washington?
Well, how much time do you have? Well, let me put this too in context. It was an amazing campaign, and I think the fact that somebody named Barack Hussein Obama, who was a state senator just a short period of time ago, could rise the way he did in our country says a lot about our country, and it says a lot about him. But I would share with you something, which I think, two facts. Number one, before he decided to run, one of the conversations that we had with both he and Michelle was that in order to win, he was going to have to capture this sense of hope as a result of great frustration with the fact that Washington doesn't work. And that would be the only way. He would have to do it in an unconventional way, or else there was no way that he was going to ever be able to compete because it wasn't a level playing field. And at the same time that we had that conversation, Michelle said, the risk that we run, of course, is you have to not only create this expectation of hope, but you also have to describe how hard change is. And if you go back and you look at tapes from the campaign, throughout the campaign, both the president and the first lady spoke often about, number one, how important it is to have hope and faith and this belief in a better future for our country, and how it's not about one man, and it's about a collective engagement, and how we all have to do this together, and how hard it's going to be. And as we got closer to the inauguration, what happened? The economy completely fell apart. And so you had the financial systems on the brink of disaster, you had the overall global economy in crisis, you had the stock market dropping precipitously, all at the same time as the president here had the largest federal deficit in our nation's history, $1.3 trillion. And so that's what greeted him. And I don't know how many of you remember, a lot of people remember Inauguration Day, but I would encourage everybody to go back and read his speech again. Because one of the criticisms that he heard after the speech is that it was sobering. It was a very somber speech. It was a very different speech than a campaign speech. And he did that having come through the transition and recognizing that between September and January, basically the world fell apart. And so you couple the fact that we already knew that the risk of high expectations, because people heard the first part about hope and change, I'm not sure they listened to the second part about this is going to be really hard and it's going to require everybody's engagement. And so when the president said, both on election night and on Inauguration Day, I'm going to extend my hand, well, he's done that. But the calculus was made, I think, by some very astute politicians that the best way to try to create crisis and hurt his presidency would be to not engage. And so there has been, notwithstanding what you might hear on the cable channels, a real lack of engagement, notwithstanding what I have seen over and over again, which is an outstretched hand. And so part of what's wrong in Washington, I think, and it's what drove him to run in the first place, the irony, is that Washington is Washington, and then there's the rest of the country. And there is a detachment that's hard to explain unless you've spent a fair amount of time in Washington. And the process, the legislative process, and it's a good example of what people have observed with healthcare, is really, really ugly. And you take the best of intentions and you put it into this sausage-making factory, and it's hard to even understand what people are talking about. When I first got there, they kept talking about cloture and reconciliation, and people don't know what that's talking about. They know what a pre-existing condition is when they've been dropped from their insurance company. They know what it means when their premiums start to escalate. They know about the fact that a country is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and 30 million people are uninsured. They understand that, but all of that gets lost in the morass of Washington. And so I think the challenge for all of us, and I mean every single person in this room, is to try to be a part of a groundswell to put pressure on Washington to change. And that's really what his intention was from the beginning. And I think part of what happened is when he won, everybody thought he was this wild magician who was going to be able to go in there and suddenly change everything, and not so fast. And I would also point out that it's been 1 year, and Rome wasn't built in a day. And his determination and steadfast commitment to deliver all of the important initiatives that he mentioned in the campaign and that he has devoted the last year to is as vibrant today as it was a year ago.
Well, it's worth remembering that Lincoln, after a year, was in some trouble. But to go on with it about change, is it Republicans refusing? Is it the lobbyists, the media?
It's all of the above. I mean, there's so much blame to go around. I could spend an hour on any one of those groups. And I think the fact of the matter is, and part of why the president implemented sweeping ethics reforms when he came into office, part of why he didn't take any money from lobbyists in the course of the campaign, part of why he pushed through ethics reforms is to try to break that stranglehold. And the most recent Supreme Court decision further empowered corporate America, the group that probably least needed empowerment. And so if you look at just follow the money. That's really all you have to do. And you see the amount of money that, for example, give you one simple example. Is there anyone in here who thinks that as a result of the financial system coming near to the brink of collapse and the risks that were taken, the systemic risks by huge, huge companies that were all interrelated, and the absolute imperative that the federal government step in and help, extremely unpopular, extremely unpopular. No one thought it was fun. Believe me, this president wasn't in the least bit interested in bailing out Wall Street, but had no choice but to do it. And now that it's been done, and now that the economy is stabilizing a little bit, wouldn't you think that you could then move forward in a more positive direction? And yet, we're now being labeled as kind of the big spenders. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. We had no choice but to do that jump start because of the risks that have been taken in the past. Yet, millions of dollars are being given to lobbyists to lobby against financial regulatory reform. And all regulatory reform is designed to do is to create some rules of the road so that we could avoid that kind of risk that was taken. If people want to go out and gamble and there isn't a jeopardy of jeopardizing the entire system, fine, we believe in the free market system, have at it. But if you're going to gamble and you're so big that you are too big to fail, meaning that the taxpayers have to bail you out, well, I think it's fair to say we should have some rules of the road. And yet there is enormous amount of money going in to try to pressure Congress not to pass financial regulatory reform.
You've talked about the need for Washington to change. I think much of the country would agree with you. There are those who argue that the president and his White House need to change as well in order to govern more effectively. Do you think some changes are in order in governance?
Absolutely.
Leadership?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about personnel, if you're talking about change of strategy. There's nobody more self-critical than President Obama. Part of the burden of being so bright is that he sees his error immediately. And he thinks every day, well, I should have done it this way, or I could do it that way, I should be improving. He challenges his team each and every day to figure out, are we actually doing this as effectively as we can? We learned a lot last year. And so absolutely, we're going to be taking new and different and innovative approaches going forward. We reach out all the time in forums, big and small, and ask people for suggestions. And I hope when we get to your questions and answers, some of your questions will be suggestions. I've had 3 other sessions today, terrific suggestions that have come out of that. The whole purpose of this is to be engaging with you and to have you really represent so that we will govern better. So of course we intend to change. We're absolutely open to change and new ideas and new approaches.
Do you have any specifics?
Well, for one thing, and I don't know that you call it a change or an evolution, but the president intends in the next couple of days to post on the web what he thinks a bill that would be good for the American people for health care would be. And there was a lot of criticism earlier. Why doesn't the president put forth his own bill? And I think the reason he didn't do it is that 7 other presidents have tried to get health care reform passed. The reason why it hasn't passed is because it's hard. And part of why it's hard is because change is hard. So it's kind of all figures in together. But under the Clinton administration, they tried the approach of putting forth a bill, and it failed terribly. And so the thought was, as a result of counsel from both Secretary Clinton and President Clinton, have a collaborative, inclusive process and work with Congress. And if there's anyone with the impression that this has been hands-off, please don't have that impression. The president's staff and the president have been very actively involved in working with both the House and the Senate to try to get health care reform delivered. But ultimately, the people that deliver and vote on a bill are Congress. If the president could do it unilaterally, he would have done it a long time ago. I can assure you of that. And so now we're at a point where it has been a painful and long and grueling process, and we now have a sense of what both the House and the Senate passed. The president is going to craft what he thinks is a good bill. It's not going to be a perfect bill, but it's going to be a good bill, and you can't let perfection be the enemy of the good, because we have a diverse population that is represented in Washington. And we're going to ask the Republicans to post their bill, put it up in plenty of time before they all come together, the leadership at the Blair House, and let's see what happens.
If you can't reach agreement in the Blair House, do you think the president is well advised to go forward with an omnibus bill using a reconciliation process, or do you think he should come forward with a smaller bill?
One of the things that I've learned, you learn a lot of things about media training when you're in public service, and one of the things that you never do is you never
please.
engage in a
Come on,
hypothetical. I know better than that.
You're just among friends here.
Yeah, I heard that line before too, just between you and me, and I cast out thousands. Seriously. Never, ever do a hypothetical. It only gets you in trouble. I don't want to prejudge the process. I think that we have no idea what will come out of the Blair House. I think that when the president went and spoke before the Republican caucus, it kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. I thought it was a great back and forth. He did the same with the Democratic caucus. We have the governors coming in town this Sunday, and they'll be in on Monday. That also will be open, and obviously the governors come from both parties. I think that open and transparency is really important in the process, and I have no idea what's going to happen in the Blair House. It'll be like selling tickets, so it'll be very exciting to see. So let's see what comes out of it. I don't want to say right now that what we would do, because it will affect that process. I'd rather let it play out.
I don't want to press you too much more on this. I also want to go to the floor soon.
They also say that people ask the questions 3 times, and if you don't answer it 3 times, they stop and move on. So.
We have a 1 question per customer rule here.
Okay,
so
good.
I actually would, I want to go to something John Podesta recently said. John Podesta was chair of the transition for the president. He runs the Center for American Progress. He's obviously very close to the Obama administration. He said in an interview this week that he thought, this was in Financial Times, that the White House had lost control of the narrative this past year, that the central story had been sort of lost to sight, and it was hard to retrieve it. And the suggestion also was that perhaps the Obama White House overlearned the lessons of the Clinton White House. The Clinton White House did too much downtown in terms of health care, and the Congress said no. This time, the Obama White House turned over a lot of responsibility to Congress, and suddenly the spotlight moved to Congress and all the strange terms, as you say, and the Obama White House sort of lost control of the story, in effect. And I'm wondering whether that is that a legitimate concern about the first year, and how should you take more power back to the White House in terms of leadership?
Well, I'm not sure that it's a matter of taking power back to the White House, because I think, as I said a few minutes ago, I think that the president and his team worked very hard with Congress. They didn't necessarily go out and have a press conference every single day about it, and so that's probably what John was referring to. I think it's a fair criticism to say we lost a bit of the narrative, and part of it is by example. If you guys remember those town hall meetings in the summer when Congress went on recess, and the rather nifty word of death panels got introduced, well, people who aren't paying a lot of attention to health care but have health care, and the vast majority of people do have health insurance, and suddenly, well, it doesn't matter if you're old or not, everybody has an elderly person who they love dearly, and you start hearing the word death panels, it scares you to death. And you haven't been paying a lot of attention. But it's enough to change the dynamic pretty substantially. And I think what we didn't have is the counter positive term to counter something like that. And that's designed to scare. And it's a lot easier to scare people than to inform people. And because health insurance reform is complex, it's hard to distill it into a simple soundbite. And so and I think part of what the 24-hour news cycle does, and we should spend a little time on the media, don't you think? That's only fair.
Well, but you had one pass at that, one time per customer, right?
No.
Please tell us about. I want to hear about that because
Well,
I'm interested.
Well,
about
you and I have actually discussed this before, but we'll share it with all of you. And that is that what I find, and I watch cable television all the time. The president keeps telling me, turn it off, Valerie, turn it off, because I walk in shaking in the morning. Morning Joe is my favorite, and it's just like, now I have their emails, and so I'm always emailing Joe, how dare you do that? And sometimes I email Mika, and I go, yell at Joe about this. But I watch it because, not just to work me up and pump me up in the morning, but because it's just good to know what's being said out there. And a lot of people watch cable, and it's not just MSNBC, it's Fox, it's out, all of it. And because of the demand for product 24 hours a day, and because of the ever-competitive nature of the media, more and more in a time where the economy is so struggling because advertising dollars are down, and so they're all fighting for their little sliver. And what seems to have worked effectively is to take a really, really crazy person from the left and a really, really crazy person from the right and put them on as though you have to choose. And what's frustrating to us, and I'd be really interested in advice on this, is there are so many big issues that face our country, whether it's the economy and how to create jobs, what to do to bring down the deficit, how to implement health care, insurance reform, energy reform, public education reform, improving our standing around the world, foreign policy. Plenty of really, really important issues that reasonable people could reasonably disagree. And so what I don't understand is why we can't have the press focus on that fairway, why they are constantly drawn to the polar extremes, because the polar extremes I don't think are really good for the country, because most people are not in the extreme. They're somewhere in the middle. And if we really wanted to move the country forward, let's have an honest debate, not about death panels, but about how we want to reasonably structure health insurance reform. So I think the media has been complicit in the polarization of the dialogue. What do you guys think? Except David. David's turn.
No, I actually agree with you, and I think the blogosphere has further poisoned this sometimes, and the language that's on the blogosphere, which is very rough, is spilling over into cable and elsewhere, into the mainstream media, and I think it's sort of diluting our politics too. But we've had conversations. I'm engaged with CNN, as you know, and we've had conversations about are there ways, are there formats? In fact, could we talk to the administration and to others about their formats we could introduce that would be more informative? The president's visit with the Republican members of the House, was extremely informative. I think you're going to get a big audience for your health care gathering next Thursday. And I think are there other kind of forums that we could have where we actually do we have to wait at the end of 4 years to have debates? Or can we have sort of serious ways that we could sit down and have people of different perspectives come together and have conversations and put that on cable? And could you get an audience? I don't know whether you could or not, but I think it's worth trying.
I think we should try, and part of it is that it's this whole kind of reality TV curiosity. So it's not just the media. Some of it falls on us too. because you'd have to support that kind of media.
Right. I mean, you said Rome wasn't built in a day. Rome also had it fell in part because of bread and circuses. And to an extent, we've created a bread and circuses
Yes,
kind of environment
we have.
around our politics. And it's not a conversation, it's not a serious dialogue. And it's hard for ideas to take hold.
But that's why you guys are so important, because I think part of what was so magical about the president's campaign is that he was able to get so many people interested in paying attention to what's happening in government that who had been so apathetic for so long and so disengaged and disenfranchised. And so part of what has been frustrating to us is to see the tenor and the tone of the conversation degrade so much that people who were captivated are saying, oh, and that's not so attractive anymore.
I agree with that. Why don't we go to the floor, and I'm going to come back right at the end and ask you about your advice for the next generation.
Great.
We'll save a few
Sounds
minutes
good.
for that. But there are microphones here, there's one here, and I think, Noelia, where are they? There's one there, and there's one there. There are four, none up here, right? There are four. And it's, as you all know, the ground rules, if you could, introduce yourself, be brief, and remember, one per customer, and every question ends with a question mark, as Joe and I used to say. Please.
Hi, thank you very much for being here. My name is Andel Koster. I'm a first-year Master's in Public Policy student here at the Kennedy School. You've been talking a lot about changing the nature of the conversations that people are having in this country, and I think the Obama campaign did a really remarkable job of using the internet to facilitate those conversations and that kind of action during the campaign. And there's a bit of a sense that that has fallen off now that the administration is in office. What do you think is the plan to sort of return to that conversation, especially using those kinds of new media tools?
Well, I think it's a fair comment, and I think that part of the problem is when you first get to Washington and the economy is in a free fall, you really have to kind of pay attention to that. And unfortunately, I think, by necessity, in the first year, we had to spend an enormous amount of time trying to get legislation through. And I think part of what we intend to do this year is get back to focusing on key pieces of legislation, but also letting the president be the chief executive officer that he is. And that's what he was during the campaign. He ran his campaign, and his campaign was a people's campaign. And I think what you're going to see this year is the president outside of Washington a lot more. He's on the road. He was on the road yesterday and today. He's going to be on the road at least once a week. So that he can, because believe me, there's no one who wants to get out of Washington more than President Obama. Because when he does, he gets new ideas, and he has a chance to engage people and go back and take those ideas. And there's nothing more rewarding than when you see your idea reflected in change in Washington. And we had a session with the business community, and there's been this whole kind of, he's in the pocket of Wall Street and he's anti-business. I mean, it's like this whole swing. And yet, if you look at this year's budget, if you look at what he said in the State of the Union, he's really focusing on key issues that are important to the business community that he heard from the business community. So whether it's small business, improving access to capital, or whether it's focusing on trade and export and infrastructure and green jobs, all of that, we didn't make it up. It came from the business community. And so making that process of engagement better, the way we did it in the campaign, and think about it, in the campaign, he spent 10 days at home the entire year of 2008. This year, he's probably spent, probably twice that much out and about the country. So we need to reverse that and get him back out with you, and we're going to do a better job of that. So thanks for mentioning that.
Please.
Hi, thank you very much for coming today. My name is Will Rubin. I'm a senior at the college from New York City. And I wanted to talk about an issue that I think has been wrapped in a little bit with the economic recovery, but is in some ways a separate issue. I know with the stimulus package and the tremendous amount of short-term spending that President Obama has pushed through, the issue of long-term spending has almost gotten wrapped in with that as well. And now this week with the retirement of Senator Bai and a few weeks ago with the failure of that Senate bill, I wanted to ask you about the bipartisan commission that President Obama proposed this week, and what do you think the prospects are of President Obama being able to deal with the long-term federal deficits that are being projected from entitlement spending that will affect our generation so much?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and it's a good area where you could really have some bipartisan cooperation. And it's interesting, and I think actually Senator Bai mentioned this example when he announced that he was not running for re-election. And he said that 7 of the people who sponsored the legislation to come up with this fiscal commission were the ones that dragged their feet and eventually killed it. 7 Republicans originally sponsored it, voted against it. And he said, if that happens and the town has gotten to the point where you really are not acting in the best interests of the people you represent and that you're looking for the short-term political victory and sacrificing long-term. And so the president decided, even though he would have preferred to have legislation because it would be stronger, to go ahead and appoint a bipartisan commission through executive order. And I'm very hopeful that they're going to work together and not to sacrifice important entitlements that are a part of our democracy and what our country stands for, but be mindful of the fact that we cannot continue with the kind of deficit that we have. We have to figure out a way of bringing it down. And I think that if we do it in a transparent and open way, and we take the appropriate amount of time to think it through, and we think in terms of short-term savings, and in this year's budget alone, the president announced that he's going to freeze for 3 years discretionary non-defense spending, and that's a way of trying to set the tone for tightening our belt. Everywhere around this country, and I'm sure many of you have student loans and you're struggling, everyone's sitting around the kitchen table trying to figure out how to make ends meet. The federal government needs to tighten its belt as well. And we have to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize a very fragile economic climate, but we also have to be mindful that over the long term, it's not good for our country in any way, shape, or form to have this kind of deficit. The best way to do that is to grow your revenues by having increased job creation, and then people pay more taxes because they're in a better situation and more able to do it. But there are lots of different ways, and one of the things that the president said is he's not going to prejudge the outcome, because he was asked a hypothetical about what he thought would come out of this. And he said, look, I've appointed really good people. I want Republicans to appoint really good people, and let's see what comes from it. So I'm hopeful, I guess is the way. Answer to your question.
This is an issue that resonates with many of the young people in the room. So if you ask for suggestions, feel free to reach out to young people about this issue as well.
I will. And if you have suggestions, you can just email me. I'm very easy to reach.
Thank you. Please.
Good evening. I'm Patrice Kunish. I'm a mid-career MPA student. And my question is for you personally, who advises the advisor? In other words, how do you prepare and do your work to advise the president?
Well, these are concentric circles, and I have my close friends, some of who, with whom I work in the White House, and some of who I stay in touch with that are very far, far away from Washington. And so I have very, very dear friends who I've had for a number of years. I mentioned Susan Scher, who's with us in the White House. David Axelrod I've known practically since I was a child. Several of the cabinet members I've known for a long time as well. And so I have a kind of a Washington circle, and then I go home and I talk to my parents, and no one gives me sounder advice than my parents. They live in the Midwest. They have always been my best advisors. And I've come home and sometimes, and my mother has said, tell Barack to do this. And she's pulling out her hair, and I always listen to her because she's often right.
I was in your office one day when you were on your phone with your mom.
Yes.
I think she was telling you.
I'm sure she's full of really good advice, as all moms are.
Please.
Right, Laura?
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Professor Gergen, for moderating the talk. And thank you for your leadership of the Council of Women and Girls. I have 2 questions. Obama addressed the Muslim world a year ago. Did I introduce myself? I'm Susanna Reyes. I work at the Women in Public Policy program here at the Kennedy School. Obama addressed the Muslim world a year ago. There's a large Muslim population here in the United States that is relatively untapped by Washington. What is your engagement of the Muslim community and other minority communities, sort of tapping into the talents there?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. One of my responsibilities is overseeing the Office of Public Engagement. And we have about 45 different constituencies with whom we engage on a regular basis, and I should say 45 and counting. Just by contrast, the Bush administration had 2. They had the evangelical community and they had the business community. And so we increased it by 43. One of those constituencies is a Muslim community. And so we do it in a variety of different ways. So when the president was in Cairo giving his speech, right after his speech, I had a small off-the-record meeting with a group of Muslim women to talk about what we could do collectively internationally through the White House Council of Women and Girls. I also went to Jordan before the speech in Cairo and had similar conversations in Jordan. And then in March, we're going to Indonesia, the country that has the largest Muslim population in the world, and where the president, as you know, lived for a number of years, and we'll have a continuing engagement there. So both through my office and through all the different departments, as for example, John Brennan, who heads up counterterrorism and national security in the White House, was in New York last weekend, and he spoke to a large group of, it began with just the Muslim community, and then we ended up making it a broader community than that. But the point was really to talk about how we can tone down the rhetoric in our country and not stigmatize and recognize that this is a country of immigrants. This is a country of a wide range of religions and no religions, and we have to maintain that kind of healthy identity if we're going to be the United States of America. And I think so part of what the president has directed both my office as well as his cabinet to do is to reach out broadly and try to keep that dialogue open on an ongoing basis. So it's not just a matter of one speech that gets international recognition, though it was a very important speech, I think, for him to make because he kind of set the bar. But then it's important for us to come along both publicly and quietly and continue those conversations. And I'm looking forward to joining him on the trip to Indonesia, and I'll be doing the same thing there more quietly as he gives his larger, more broadly viewed speeches.
Fine, yes, sir.
My name's John Gould. I'm a senior at the college. First of all, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.
I'm curious, we've seen kind of over the last few months a wave of what I guess could be called conservative populism with the Tea Party movement on the far right and kind of in a softer form here in Massachusetts with this special election. I'm wondering how the administration, the American people, the Democratic Party could rechannel this sort of kind of populist anger and rechannel this sentiment into trusting government to solve these problems that were created by and large by a different government and a business community as opposed to by this government.
Well, anybody have an answer to that question? Because if you do, please see me after. I mean, that's the challenge. That's exactly the challenge. And I think, I mean, look at it. People are really, they're scared. Everybody knows somebody who's lost a job, and no one is safe. A lot of the college graduates, their first year, they got laid off. The law students thinking they were going to big law firms got laid off. I mean, this economic crisis has hit all levels of our society, and people are having a hard time seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. And when they hear things like the gross national product has gone from -6 to +6, that doesn't matter if the people on either side of them don't have a job. And in many communities, the entire communities have been decimated when a factory closes. That's why the president was willing to step in and give an unprecedented amount of money to the automotive industry to save millions more jobs. And so I think what you really have got to do is to figure out how to engage people all over again in a positive way. And it's hard to do that when people are suffering so much. And I think part of what happened here in Massachusetts, and it's happened in other places as well, happened in New Jersey, happened in Virginia, it's more of an anti-incumbent frustration. It's part of why President Obama was elected. And so figuring out how to capture that energy and channel it in a constructive and positive direction, even if they are in favor of, let's say, a different form of health care insurance and reform, fine. But what's happening is it's an anti-government. I mean, that's the Tea Party. They really are trying to rebel against government at all. And I think that's, again, it's an extreme. And this is not a country where extremes are who we are. We are really much more moderate than that. And it's always a lot easier, again, to scare people and to get them angry when they're already scared and they're already uncertain. And I think that's what the Tea Party has tried to capture. And a lot of where I see the hope in the future is, frankly, you guys.
Thanks so much.
So get out there and get busy. We'll get to more to that at the end.
Please, sir.
Thank you very much for your presence here. I am an admissions officer here in Harvard College, and hated by many, loved by few. Anyway, but what I think I see, and you just addressed it, is widespread frustration in the land because of a failure to understand. And I think that there's an analogy within the last 25 years. When the desktop computer was introduced, computer phobia was rampant, and it was considered, this newfangled technology was considered the domain of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. But some visionaries saw that if we were to publish some booklets, books, spreadsheet made simple, DOS for dummies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then maybe they would understand, and we would give them a base level of understanding, and they could take it by themselves. Now, is there an analogy here?
Yes.
If the Obama administration and others, and I'm asking this of you, could write some much simpler booklets on housing foreclosure, of the health care bill, or Wall Street collapse, whereas a typical person, including those in the Tea Party, et cetera, could understand the basics of it, because I feel that many of them simply don't. Do you think that is an analogy, and that's my question?
I think it's an excellent analogy, and I think that probably the biggest struggle that everybody has, and this is in relationships, and it's in governing, and it's in business, is communication. And figuring out, with a country as richly diverse as ours, what's the best platform for that communication? What's the common language that you can use? And that's why I think probably hope and change were so catchy, because it was really very simple, and it was something everyone understood the definition of. That's why death panels were so catchy. Everybody didn't necessarily know what it meant, but they knew it was really bad. And so I think part of what our challenge is to find a very simple way of communicating and figuring out a variety of different mediums to do that in. And we start with our White House website, but we got to get it out more broadly into the atmosphere, and that is our challenge. It's a very good analogy.
Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ahmed Jalal. I'm an MPID 1 student. One of the great inspirations of Barack Obama's election was when he said that we will not fight terror with terror, and that we will not stoop to the level of barbarity of the terrorists in order to defeat them. But yet we see that organizations such as Blackwater, they're still operating in certain parts of the world, although their operations have been curtailed. But some of the work that they were doing, which is quite unsavory, still continues to date. My question to you is, President Barack Obama's view on fighting terror, has it changed since, due to realities of war and realities of power, from the time that he was campaigning to become the president, that would inspire all of us?
No, of course not. And if you know something specific that you could point to, tell me what it is, because I would love to investigate it, because the president's view, and he said this the day after he was elected, when he ruled out use of extraordinary measures of interrogation, is that that's not who we are. And he has steadfastly supported that. So if you have any evidence to the contrary, you let me know.
Good evening. My name is Leroy Foster, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School, and I thank you for taking the time to be with us here tonight. Would you talk a little bit about the president's decision to meet with the Dalai Lama and what he wanted to accomplish through that meeting, particularly in light of the recent tensions with China?
Yes. Well, let's begin with my trip to Dharamsala, India, to visit the Dalai Lama last year, which was probably one of the highlights, I think, of my year. And the president asked me to go personally and invite the Dalai Lama to come to the United States after the president's trip to China. That was something that we thought would help with our relationship with China. And the president asked me to go personally because, out of respect for the Dalai Lama, he wanted him to know that because the Dalai Lama had planned to be in the United States prior to our trip to China. And he thought it was very important for the Dalai Lama to understand that it was not a sign of disrespect that the president didn't see him when he was in Washington earlier in the year, but that the president thought he could be more helpful to both the people of Tibet as well as to our relationship with China to wait until after our trip to China. But all former presidents have seen the Dalai Lama and granted him an audience. It was a personal visit. It was one where we discussed, and I had the privilege of sitting in the meeting, so there was a discussion of culture and tradition and religion, and the Dalai Lama gave the president some very sound advice about the importance of the United States as a world leader and a democracy, and how our values and spirit of truth and justice and transparency and open press and open speech are all important principles, and he encouraged the president to stick by those principles because of how important that leadership is around the world. So it was a very interesting and heartfelt message that came from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so the president's view was that it was important to grant him that audience that he requested, and that doesn't mean that China's not very important to us. It is very important, and we'll have an ongoing dialogue with China. We had a terrific trip there, but that doesn't mean that you allow another country to tell you with whom you can meet. That's not who we are.
Please.
Hi, my name is Prachi Sanghavi, and I'm a PhD student in health policy here. So the Obama administration has formally taken actions against torture of suspected terrorists by making past authorizations for torture, by revoking the past authorizations for torture from the previous administration, and also closing prisons. However, in practice, the administration is rendering prisoners on non-binding diplomatic assurances to countries that are known to torture, and has also broadly asserted the state secrets privilege whenever victims of torture have brought forward legitimate cases. So could you explain that inconsistency?
Sure, it's complicated. And first of all, I think your last statement I would question, and we haven't done it whenever. I think that what you have here is a natural tension between national safety and national security, and making sure that we treat people with fairness and consistent with the values of who we are. And these are very difficult decisions to make. The Attorney General is going through that struggle right now. And I think that what you have to do is you have to, as not just the President of the United States, but the Commander-in-Chief, you have to make some very difficult judgments, and you have access to information that not everybody has. And it's interesting because part of what we criticized in the prior administration was how they handled those decisions and how they made those decisions. And so what we strive to do is to be as transparent and as open as we can, but obviously you cannot say everything. And so that's the struggle, and it's a tough, tough struggle, and we try. I mean, I suppose the one assurance I could give you is a lot of people who are absolutely committed to the fundamental values of who this country is in terms of democracy and justice and treating people with dignity, but at the same time, paramount is to keep our country safe. And it is a very complicated struggle. It is not black and white, and we do the best we can.
Thank you. We're going to try to get a couple more in. Yes, please.
Hi, Ms. Jarrett. Thank you so much for being here. I just think you're brilliant. And
Thank you. Thank you.
I think
you want to come work in the White House?
My name is Bridget Hilton. I graduated from Harvard Law School last year, and I think my question borders more on the lines of advice. I am currently working at the Deval Patrick campaign and very happy there, and I'm very passionate about politics and government. And I'm also betrothed to a law firm in New York, and I intend to go and practice there, but I anticipate that it won't be for very long, and I was wondering what you think is, how soon is it too soon to get out so that I can do what I really want to do?
That's a good question. Oh, I wish we could come and spend hours together, but let me put it as succinctly as I can, as soon as you can. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm really kidding. I stayed at a law firm for years. I think, and I gave a speech earlier to the women law students, and my advice to them was, look, to thine own self be true. And it's a very good experience. I learned discipline and structure and how to write and how to keep files and how to prepare myself in a very organized way, which has come in handy. It really has. But you do reach a point where if when you wake up in the morning, there is just not a zip in your step, and it doesn't mean every single day, because every job, except my job, has drudgery. I have no drudgery, but most jobs have drudgery. And so some days are good, some days are bad. But if in the morning you don't feel a certain commitment that at least you're getting something out of it that's going to be helping you down the line and preparing you for something, then it's time to go. And only you're going to know the answer to that question. And there is no perfect time to leave. I think if you go, it's worth staying at least a couple years, which is example of what Michelle did, so that you know that it's not right for you, and you're going to learn a lot in those 2 years. You won't regret spending a couple of years doing it. But if you are involved with Deval's campaign, I just did a fundraiser for him last night in Washington. I think he's terrific. Everybody should vote for Deval Patrick. But if you have a passion, and we're going to, I hope, get to this in a second, if you have a passion for public service, then as soon as you can, figure out a way to serve.
Thank you. Two more, and we're going to stop, please.
Hi, Ms. Barrett. My name is Ashley, and I'm a mid-career here at the Kennedy School, and I also think you're brilliant, and I'm totally impressed at the way you're able to sustain the conversation at such a high level for so long. And we talk about leadership a lot here at the Kennedy School, and I won't out my advisor who is in this room and not asking the question, so I'm going to ask it, because we've talked some about how perhaps in the grassroots or maybe on the more left side of things, we wonder if the president was a little too conflict averse the first year and trying to overcompensate for the example that was set by the previous regime, I mean administration.
You meant regime, I can tell.
And so I was wondering what you think of that personally and professionally, if the opinions differ, and if we can look forward to taking it to him a little bit more this year. And then, of course, I came with one question, and then I competed with myself to ask another, so maybe you could have a choice. Can we look forward to an increase in spending for USAID in developing countries, particularly in public health and helping keep girls in school, sanitation and hygiene and stuff like that, which we know does show the world that we're not just right, but that we are good? Thanks.
That was very well put.
I think I heard it from a guy called BHO.
Well, to your second question, yes, we certainly hope so. And we also think, as President Clinton, President Bush are doing with the Haiti Fund, is that part of what we should do in government is to encourage the private sector as well to step in and help. And there are many people who do. I mean, philanthropy in this country is part of who we are. But to figure out ways of spotlighting those wonderful contributions that are made by the private sector and encouraging people to do that to help leverage the public sector dollars is something that I think is very important. And we have a terrific new head of the USAID who jumped in and hit the ground running immediately, like 2 days before the Haiti earthquake, and he's fabulous. So to that one. To your first question in terms of conflict, I would remind you, and you'll probably remember this, that in the course of the campaign, both in the primary and in the general election, there were moments when the president's core constituency would say, punch back, do something, fight, come on, I want to see you do that. And the president is who he is. And I always say this about people. People are packages. And part of who he is somebody who has a very even-keeled temperament. His highs are not very high. His lows are not very low. He brings a certain empathy and compassion to what he does. He's very good at seeing the other side of the argument. And he just doesn't have a mean spirit at all. That doesn't mean he doesn't get frustrated, and it doesn't mean he doesn't get angry, but he tries to challenge in a constructive way. And I think that what you're going to see, because he is very frustrated over the last year that he was unable to get Congress in particular to engage with him in a constructive dialogue, and that everything had to be for political gain as opposed to public good. And so I think he's going to kind of start calling people out a little bit more on that, but he's not going to do it in a combative way because he doesn't want to become that polar extreme. But I think part of what he was able to do, as only he can do when he went to the Republican caucus, is to let people see the two different styles, and then you decide for your own. And he said this in the course of the campaign when people said early on, you know, how can somebody named Barack Hussein Obama win? You're the first black person to be taken seriously as a candidate who could win. And part of what he said is, look, I'm going to be who I am. And I'm going to put my faith in the American people. And notwithstanding what you might see with the Tea Parties and the birthers, although the birthers really do annoy him because he says, why can't they just believe I was born in this country? I mean, come on, I've given them my birth certificate. It's still not good enough. So they tick him off. But they do. But I think that if you continue to set the tone, and tone does start at the top, of engaging in a civil way. And we didn't talk about this much today, other than our little discussion about the media. But I think just generally, what we could enjoy in this country is if young leaders in particular encourage their elders. And this happened in the campaign. There were a lot of young people that encouraged their parents and their grandparents to support the president. Do the same thing about civility, because it really would allow government, I think, to focus on being constructive and productive if we could just tone down the rhetoric.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Megan Kearns, and I'm with the Women in Public Policy program. And I know the president has been incredibly focused on gender-related issues, passing the Lilly Ledbetter Act and the Council for Women and Girls and repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or at least looking to repeal that. And my question is, with so much on the president's agenda with the economic crisis and with healthcare, how do you, in a position to advise the president, ensure that he keeps a focus on gender equity?
Well, because he's married to Michelle Obama. His secret weapon. He has 2 daughters who he wants to see live in a world where they can compete on a level playing field. He was raised by a single mom. So these are issues that are in his heart. And he has me there each and every day talking about the importance of the White House Council on Women and Girls, and broadly embraced by his cabinet. So this is an issue that he really doesn't need encouragement. And the other thing, which I always like to say, is that any leader really does know how to needs to know how to multitask. And he is truly, and I don't brag about him too much, but he is pretty terrific. But it's fun to see him in the course of the day go from a terrorism briefing to mortgage foreclosures to figuring out how we can change our dialogue on with the Middle East to, from this to that to this to that in the course of the day, and to maintain his focus and be able to really pay attention and then to switch gears dramatically and do the same and have the energy to see a conversation through to its closure. And there are so many times where you'll see people who get tired of a conversation, even though it's not over and they just want to make a decision and move on. And he does not enjoy conversation for conversation's sake, but he does like to make sure that he brings it to the logical conclusion. And so that kind of strength and discipline of intellectual rigor coupled with empathy is what I think you'll see throughout. So he's never going to lose sight of that issue, don't worry.
Valerie, if we move to this last question of your thoughts, counsel for this next generation, I wanted people to make sure people knew that she has had not only the experience now in government, in Chicago, the law firm, also had extensive experience in the nonprofit sector, chair of the University of Chicago Medical Center Board, vice chair of the University of Chicago Board, numerous other nonprofits, and has worked in corporate America. And just before, and for more than a dozen years, and was for a real estate company and was of Habitat Company and was CEO and president of that company. So this is a woman who has worked in all sectors and succeeded in all sectors. She looked at you and said, the younger generation said, I'm depending on you. What's the advice you have then as we close?
Well, oh gosh, all these young minds listening. Succinctly again, find your passion. And don't be afraid to take a leap of faith and try something that's a little bit outside of your comfort zone. And don't succumb to pressure, whether it's peer pressure or parental pressure or spousal pressure or any kind of pressure. You've got to do what really feels right for you. And all I can tell you is that before I came here today, I was trying to count how many jobs I've had. And so I'm in my 9th job. And it's been a very circuitous path that's brought me to where I am today. And I have absolutely no regrets. And I think it was for primarily because I was willing to take those leaps of faith and trust my gut and move. Opportunities never knock at opportune moments because everybody resists change. It's just human nature. You get settled and you get comfortable. And what I encourage you to do is to push yourself outside of that comfort zone. David may not remember this, but in the first conversation we had a breakfast during the transition in New York. And we talked about the importance of public service. And one bit of advice he gave me, which I still think about all the time, is he said, that, and it's appropriate to be having that conversation here, he said that what was remarkable, one of the things that was remarkable about John F. Kennedy is that he recruited a whole new generation of people who devoted their career to public service and didn't just come in and out as I have done, but came and stayed and really left their mark. We're ending just in time. I'm about to lose my voice. And he said in order to do that again, because all those people are now retiring, and so there will be an opportunity for a new influx of people, he said you're going to have to change government. Because those extraordinary people who worked on the campaign and stayed up all night, night after night after night, and slept 5 to a floor, and created this new media strategy of working on the internet and communicating so broadly, they're not going to come in and just be bureaucratic pencil pushers. And so part of our challenge is to make it fun again. And I think that's what the president is determined to do, but we need your help. And so come in and help us make it fun. And try it, you'll like it. I promise you, you'll like it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Valerie, I think you could tell that people here are just deeply appreciative that you've come here. We're delighted to meet Laura. We welcome you back to the Kennedy School as much as you can come. But we're just deeply appreciative that you're serving the country. And I must tell you, I had the sense, and I think people have the sense here tonight, after I first met you, it gave me great reassurance about Barack Obama to know that you were there as a counselor and his first friend. Thank you.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
very kind of you. Thank you all. That was very sweet. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Oh, thank you guys. Thank you all. Thank you very much.